Hey, this podcast holds nothing sacred. This is Life, Tech, and Sundry. And what is Sundry? It's our experiences put in a melting pot to the internet. So join us on this wild ride called the LTS Podcast. Follow us at LT Sundry on Twitter, LTS.pod on Instagram, Life, Tech, and Sundry on YouTube, and all your favorite podcast distribution services. Stay frosty.
Welcome to LTS Out of Office. I'm your host, Marcos Lopez, and today I am doing an episode that was inspired by, it was inspired by hackers. So sit back, lock in, if you will, and here we go. Look, I'll be honest. I didn't set out to spend my afternoon scrolling the history of national security features. I clicked on a random YouTube story about forgotten tech and classic move, ended up scrolling down a massive rabbit hole of wiki links. I somehow found myself here, knee-deep in the 1980s court transcripts and Pentagon incidents. Yes, even the Pentagon. And there are many, many reports brought to you by Wikipedia. If you want to be not hacked, you could always check Wikipedia's histories. It's not for homework, so you could always check them out. But yeah, hashtag not sponsored. And people, it's wild out there. And it's cold, by the way. Okay, it's wild to see the DNA of our current 2026 cybersecurity landscape buried in the stories of bored kids with dial-up modems. We like to think our modern defenses are these sophisticated, ironclad fortresses, but it turns out our collective digital safety rests on the shoulders of who? Teenagers who just wanted to see if they could, quote-unquote, break the internet before that was even a phrase, people. It's terrifying. It's hilarious. And honestly, it's the most hopeful thing I've read all week. Let's look at how we got here. Getting it off with the evolution of the government hoodwink. First story, I'm going to try to organize them chronologically. Because why not? That way I can package it up and share it to you, dear listeners. The 414s or 414s, the quote-unquote whiz kids of Milwaukee, 1983. Beautiful decade, right? The 80s. Well, that's where cybersecurity legislation had its first system tests against hackers that really didn't want to do any harm, which led to a lot of legislature. Here we go. What was the target for this event? Well, turns out, a little place you might not know, known as Los Alamos, and their national security laboratories, which included 60 other high-profile institutional systems that definitely should have known better, by the way. But it's the 80s. It's a growing time, right? Who did this hoodwink, if you will? Well, the 414s, to include a young hacker known as, or whiz kid known as Neil Patrick. No, not that Neil Patrick. Used simple computers to identify systems still running on factory set default passwords, slipping into nuclear research databases like they were looking for a high score on Galaga, the video game, by the way, young listeners. And no, despite the name, Neil Patrick was not a legendary doctor turned actor, though his medical grade precision in bypassing security systems was certainly worth a TV deal. He should have become an actor, but he went into hacking. Of course, just one kid. There was a multiple group of kids. What was the lesson here for the government? Security is only as strong as its weakest user. This embarrassment directly birthed the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, CFAA, essentially ending the innocent war games era of hacking and making, quote-unquote, looking around a federal crime. Yep, just because you were curious and you could go in doesn't mean there won't be consequences, basically. That works in real life. Why not in the cyber world, right? Or in the internet? They had to make it into law in early 1980s. course, this wasn't the first. No, was it the first? I guess it could be considered the first, but it was the one brought to you by children that didn't want to cause harm. They just wanted to test their abilities and exploit weaknesses in the system. All these lessons leads us to today. There were more incidents that were keystones for what we have today. Here we go with more. While the 414s were busy being unintentional architects of federal law, the government was about to learn that their most secure files weren't even safe from someone whose biggest life struggle was avoiding dysentery in the Oregon Trail computer game, sorry. If you know, you know. This incident was brought to you by a 10-year-old. In what decade? Again, the 80s. To be more exact, the late 80s. What was the target in the story? Like previously mentioned, the Department of Justice's internal filing systems. What was the hoodwink here? Hacker Chris Kubica utilized word dialing to find active lines and guessed the password 6 times 0 basically. Also, a little bit of nuance. What is word dialing? Well, you go on a phone book, young people out there, you go on a phone book via the computer, and via the area code, you just dial the numbers. For example, where I live in the city, near the city, the area code is 347. All the numbers that the computer modem can, mind you, your computer is hooked up to the internet via a modem, not a router, to a phone line. So from there, you use an instruction set that tells them to dial anything with the area code 242, an example, and then ... to the rest. So basically, just telling your computer to call every phone number in an area code until another modem picks up and squeals back, or picks up the phone, if you will. And she did guess the password, like I said. What was this password, like I said? 6 zeros, basically. She spent, how long you say? 2 weeks in the system, fully convinced the entire interface was just a text-based adventure game. Mind you, this is the 80s, so a lot of the games were text-based. And if you've played any of those games, pretty fun. I recommend them. I grew up with some. I learned math through there when I was growing up, like in 2nd grade and all those things. So, if you know, good times. Oregon Trail, all those ones, right? But turns out this was the Department of Justice's, or the FBI's system. She was just in there reading, a lot of reading. Now, what was the lesson gained here? Overreacting with an 8-year computer ban is a great way to stifle a prodigy. Kubica eventually became a world-class advisor, proving these kids are better as assets than as outcasts. Mind you, Kubica also joined the Air Force later in life and did their service in the military. So, multiple contributions here. And what did they respond with? 8-year ban. Like, what is this, a Steam server? Oh no, man. If you think a 10-year-old playing a game was a wake-up call, imagine the Pentagon. Imagine the Pentagon's face when they thought World War III had started, only to realize the quote-unquote invading army was just 2 teenagers living out their own Matrix fantasy. 1998. What's the story for this one? It's called The Solar Sunrise and the Pentagon Panic of 98. The target for this incident was over 200 US military and Pentagon computers and all those juicy systems during a time of heightened international tension. The government was already sweating with outside people trying to get into the systems, so they were quote-unquote heightened, and still someone got through. Who did the hoodwinking? Or what was the hoodwink? Well, 2 California teens. Their handles I'm going to tell them as their handles because their names are hard. Machiavelli, one of them, and Tohi. These are their handles. If you know, you know. You can look up online because these names are hard and I already know that I will mispronunciate them. at least they can be a little bit more lenient with their internet handles. They exploited a well-known vulnerability in the Solaris operating system while the rest of the world was busy listening to Britney's Baby One More Time hit. They were hacking the system, if you will. The statement of "I'm in," so valid. What was the lesson? If two teenagers in a bedroom can mimic a coordinated nation-state attack, your defense's strategy isn't just flawed, it's non-existent, but in reality, isn't just these war rooms just asleep overnight? I don't know, man, I'm just being crazy here. But yeah, it's really flawed and it's lacking. This public shaming, by the way, led to the military's first permanent cyber defense command in 98, people. After decades of playing cat and mouse and handing out jail time, the government finally had a light bulb moment, an aha moment. If you can't beat the kids, maybe you should start paying them to do your homework, to find what you're lacking. You got the big picture, the hacker kids can find the small flaws in your defense. Hasn't that always been the thing? There's always a thing in regular businesses and companies to hire out people. The TV show Breaking Bad, there was the bald guy, not the main character, the security guy, but he was a post-military specialist. What was the name in that was Breaking Bad? That was a very highly trained bodyguard that was already old.
That would be Mike Ehrmantraut, the veteran fixer and former police officer who worked for Gustavo Fring.
Mike, yeah, if you know Mike from Breaking Bad, he's a menace. He would go into companies as a side gig to show what their security flaws were, if you will, to pass by and say, there's a scene. You can watch it at your own time. Anyways, where was I? The quote-unquote hacked the Pentagon. Still with the Pentagon. The high school senior of 2016. Target: Official Department of Defense and its public-facing websites. The hoodwinks, or the singular one, the hoodwink. An 18-year-old David Dworkin discovered 6 critical vulnerabilities in his downtime between high school classes. Was still in school and he was schooling the government, proving that, quote, that famous quote, "I'm in," isn't just a movie trope, but a legitimate service provided by Gen Z. What was the lesson? Collaboration is more effective than litigation. By inviting the quote-unquote hackers in, the government secured its system faster and cheaper than any private firm could. Plus, a handshake from the Secretary of Defense looks way better on a resume than a mugshot and jail time. This leads us straight to today. We've moved from quote-unquote default passwords to high-stakes global competitions where the winners aren't just getting a trophy, they're getting the keys to the kingdom. Closing this session with the 0-day quest, the current Prodigy 2025. What was the target in this incident or event? The global digital infrastructure and modern US government software. Did the hoodwinking here? Well, their name is Dylan, a high school junior, transitioned from school software workarounds to placing in the top 3 of 0-day quest global hacking event, identifying exploits in the very code the US government relies on daily. What was the lesson here? Curiosity is a resource, not a crime. In 2026, we finally realized that the youngsters breaking into systems are the very ones who will help us build the next generation of unhackable ones. Turns out that the quote-unquote threat was actually our future tech support. And with that, dear listeners, that's the report for today at least. Look, I know it's a little grim to realize that for about 40-ish years, the only thing standing between us and total digital anarchy was a 10-year-old's boredom. We are definitely in a tunnel. And yes, it's dark. And yes, the walls are made of unpatched legacy code and a 6 times over password. No, not one, multiple passwords. But there is a light at the end of this thing. And it isn't a train. It's the glow of a laptop screen held by it's like famous or like renowned Dylan, like Chris, all those kids, the 414s. We finally stopped trying to arrest the very people who can see the cracks in the walls. So, while the present feels like a chaotic game of catch-up, the future looks bright, mainly because the quote-unquote scary hackers are now the ones making sure your fridge doesn't join a botnet, since it's interconnected, you know? A lot of things are interconnected and thus can be hacked. I'm your host, Marcos Lopez, and this has been LTS Out of Office. I'm gonna go change my password right now to something better, hopefully, than my dog's name. Rest in peace. And then grin at the ceiling. Stay safe out there, stay bundled up, and stay frosty. And you know exactly where to find me. Links in the description. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye now.